Thursday, September 7th. This is the briefing of the Dallas City Planning Commission. Welcome to all our guests. And always, this is just the time for commissioners to ask questions of staff. We'll hold all our comments to the horseshoe at 12:30. We're going to jump right into the docket and begin with Mr. Pepe.
Anybody need a doctor? Anyone need a doctor? I forgot mine.
Mr. Pepe.
Three online.
Okay.
We do have three commissioners online, Commissioner Popkin, Hawk, and Anderson. Good morning.
Okay, so let's, while we're waiting for Pepe to get started, Mr. Mulkey has a quick announcement for us.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. As I may have mentioned on last meeting, the zoning team added 3 new senior planners in the month of August, which is very, very, very exciting. I introduced Gianna Bridges previously. I wanted to introduce another 2 new senior planners. This is Laquan Clinton and Martin Bay. They took this lead one, but at the end of the month. Pretty much gave me cases on the first day. So they really hit the ground running. And you'll start to see cases. Thank you very much.
Did you tell them that the thing in school song?
I did not. So
Like to hear. Well, welcome on board. We all look forward to working with you. Forward to seeing great things from Mr. Pepe. When you get ready, we're ready to start. Number 1.
But am I sharing today? You guys say okay, item number 1, Z223122. This is located off Ferguson Road. And it's an application for a planned development district for MF2 district UC on property zoned in R725A single family district, partially with specific use permit 608 for a private school and daycare center, and a specific use permit number 2075 for a tower antenna for cellular communication on the south corner of Ferguson Road and Hibiscus Drive. It's 5.7 acres. So here's our site as it exists today. The surrounds as well. So it's currently developed as a church, and there are actually churches to the west, northwest, north, northeast, and east. And then there's some multi-family to the east, as well as the White Rock Library. So
I don't think we're seeing the presentation online. Is anyone else online seeing it?
I have it shared for the room, but it's not shared for WebEx.
Thank you, Commissioner Popkin. Yeah, it's not up on. It's up, I think, only on our screen.
Yes.
Right.
I bet you can see it now.
Yes, we see it now. Thank you.
Thank you.
The area of request is currently zoned R7.5A single family district, and is currently developed with a church and a tower antenna for cellular communication. Portions of the site also include the SUP approvals for SUP 608, and that's for a private school and daycare center, and SUP 2075 for the tower antenna that exists on the site. Although the rights for the SUP 608 apply, it's that SUP is split between that and part of the city library property. It's unlikely that would be developed in any way, but because it is split, they didn't terminate that SUP. Tower antenna is proposed to remain on the site in its current place, and the current zoning should not alter its condition. The applicant proposes to redevelop this site with retirement housing uses. Code defines retirement housing as a residential facility principally designed for persons 55 years of age and older. This use does not include convalescent homes, hospice care, and related institutions use, which is a separate use. The applicant proposes to tie height and reduce minimum parking to the provision of mixed income housing. And the conditions also include design standards from 4.1107, mixed income housing design standards. I'm going to get down to the site. So here we are on Ferguson, looking southwest down Ferguson. Subject property being right here on the left. It's the church as it exists today. Spin around more of the service parking of the church. Now we're looking kind of northeast up Ferguson. We're going to walk down south a bit, still part of the existing church. Driveway entrance for the existing church. And farther down the southwestern part of the map. Now I'm going to look at some of the surrounding uses. You can see church across the way. There's a treated area, and there's more churches to the north, northeast, west. Looking across Ferguson here, looking at other adjacent church properties. I think that's also the entrance to the library, the driveway you see there. And now we're looking northeast up Ferguson, doing my best across the street, and this expanse is part of the church that's to the west. So when we get down to the development plan, this is what's proposed. It's one building with a retirement housing use. They have an open space with a walking trail to the west that helps them preserve a lot of the only existing trees on the lot primarily are clustered in that open space. So that's, yeah, as you can see, it's right there on the western part. Walking trails doing that. And the development plan includes some improved accesses from the site to the sidewalks. Those are voted into conditions as well, but they're depicted here. That's very small, and I apologize for that. So I will on a specific development scenario should you ask, but they modify many of the M2 base. They cap their dwelling units at 164. It's actually less, generally less dense than would be MF2. They have 36-foot base height, but they would increase that by 14 with the MIH, and keeping several of the other conditions of MF2 the same. Basic income housing component is 20% of the units are divided in 51 to 60% AMFI. That's 30 per unit when we apply it to 164 units. And it allows that increase in height to 50 feet, 0.5 spaces per unit. Helps limit the amount of service parking surrounding the facility. Other design standards are generally those found in 4.1107. That includes pedestrian scale lighting, transparency, improved sidewalks, crossings of driveways, and improved access points. Those are added to the PD specifically, additionally, to facilitate safe movement between the facility and public realm. We got 10% minimum open space, 0.5 spaces per unit. And they did add beyond the 4.11 street furniture along Ferguson. So staff recommendation is approval subject to a development plan and conditions.
Questions? Maybe on this side. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Garza, one.
Is this item coming off consent?
Yes, it is. Number two is, I'm sorry, it's getting held, yes. Sure, is this case, you have a date for the whole?
It is gonna be brief today.
Oh, you want it brief?
Yeah.
Okay, and it will be held to what day, do you know?
I hadn't figured that out.
Okay. Do that. Watch.
Good morning. Item number 2 is case 2233179. The request and application for a CS commercial service district on property zoned in IR industrial users district in a TH3A townhouse district. It is located on the south line of West Ledbetter Drive, west of Duncanville Road. It's approximately 20.0328. This is, as mentioned, is by Ledbetter. It's along Ledbetter on the southwest of Dallas. So this is an aerial map of showing an area of request. Surrounding uses within the area of request around the surrounding areas is so it's office, showroom, warehouse, industrial site to the north across Ledbetter. There's also a church, temple across Ledbetter on the west side. There is also a missionary, heavy equipment or truck sales and service adjacent on the west, and then there's also missionary, heavy equipment or truck sales and services on the east adjacent, and then there's also a mobile home park along the east, and then there's single family use and undeveloped area on the south of the area of request. So the area of request is currently undeveloped and is zoned an IR industrial research district and a TH3A townhouse district. The applicant requests a CS commercial service district to allow warehouse development. So these are some of the site photos of the site. On West Ledbetter Road, looking southwest. Looking southwest. Looking west from the adjacent property. Looking south. Looking south again. Looking southeast, looking southeast again, and surrounding uses, looking southwest on Ledbetter, looking west, looking northwest, looking north across Ledbetter, looking northeast, looking east on Ledbetter Road, and looking southeast. And then the dwelling standards that they're proposing to the existing is, as I mentioned, IR and TH3A, and they're proposing CS. And then staff is recommending approval.
Thank you very much. Questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Young?
As best as you can determine, did the TH3A, call it buffer strips, predate the 1987 zoning transition?
Yes. So
I guess my broader question is, tell me what we know about how and why that came about.
I'm not clear. As for historical areas that I saw was that all around the area was mostly undeveloped since, I believe, so in around 2001, it was mostly industrial, and then in 2004 is when the townhome subdivision was incorporated. not sure if we got the district.
Now, is that the TH2 to the south of the site, or are you talking about the TH3 that's part of the site?
The TH2. So I don't know if the TH3 and the TH2 were at the same time.
Oh, you think they were?
Yes.
Okay, so 2004, and I guess that being 19 years ago, we don't know what the rationale was for putting TH3 on that property.
Correct.
It's multi-ownership, so there must have been a call public hearing or something.
I'm not sure.
Okay, I don't see how it could be otherwise since all those property owners joined in. Have you had any discussion with the applicant about rezoning the IR portion to CS and leaving the TH3 portion alone?
No.
So we don't know if the applicant has any interest in that at all.
Because the original request was to change the TH3 to IR, and staff recommended for it to be CS, and for the IR's property to also become CS.
Okay, so it sounds like the applicant's focus is on that TH3 property. And rezoning the northern part of the property wouldn't do anything for it.
Commissioner Carpenter.
Given that this is a straight zone, a request for a straight zone change to CS, that would mean we would open up like many different uses, not just even if we assume that warehouse is a suitable use, we would open up commercial motor vehicle parking. I'm a little confused as to why staff would recommend straight zone change to CS, given the number of potentially incompatible intrusive uses that are allowed in CS when you have residential budding single family neighborhood.
Because so the surrounding area on the north is already IR, and then the portion of the TH3, it would be more likely if they leave it at TH3, it would be a landlocked portion.
So you're more concerned with that being landlocked than the effect on the neighborhoods?
I mean, most of the uses in commercial, they do require the RAR, which is residential adjacency review, and then there's also a 20-foot requirement for the rear setback belonging to residential.
And so it's your opinion that the 20-foot setback would be adequate to mitigate any potential negative effects of a heavy commercial use on adjoining neighborhood?
And then the as I mentioned, the residential agency review permits.
Commissioner Rubin.
Yeah, just a quick question to follow up on Commissioner Young's question. Since this is being held, I don't want to ask you to go down rabbit trails, but understanding the history of how this TH3 zoning got there might be helpful, as well as the industrial and CS. So whenever this comes back, I'm not suggesting that you spend an inordinate amount of time on this, but if you're able to quickly get to the zoning history, that would be illuminating. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Young.
Looking at the aerial photo, it looks like, to some extent on the subject property, but certainly on the properties to the west, there are heavy-duty uses extending downward into the TH3A area. See what looks like some commercial motor vehicle parking. You can't tell what else is going on down there, but there's something going on the south end of the subject property and then the properties to the west. Do we have any idea whether those are legal non-conforming uses or illegal uses?
No.
And I'm told by people in the area that the mobile home park to the east is indeed a non-conforming use. You don't know that one or another.
I know on that one there was an SUP, but I'm not too sure what the SUP was for.
Okay.
So actually it's an SUP for a mobile home park.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a portion of it. It's SUP 554, which has a permanent time frame. So it's possible that SUP existed before the CS zoning was established. The CS zoning there, if we look at our GIS map and under the case number field, it just says transition and it gives the date that 51A was adopted. That means it existed. I believe that means it existed prior to 51A. The SUP only applies to a portion of that property zone CS.
All SUPs were carried over in the zone.
Oh, okay.
And point of information, the mobile home has been there. This is the first land use there in that area going back to the early 50s.
One other thing to note, just real quick, the IR zoning that's on this property and some of the surrounding properties, that's also a transition district. But then I click on TH3A and it doesn't give a case number or the transition status, so I'm not really sure when that is.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Herbert.
So I noticed you visited the property. Could you talk about what you saw with the uses currently, or how they're using the property?
The current
Yes.
survey request?
Yes.
Right now, when I went, they were just removing all the trees. They're making it. They're cleaning the lot.
Did they have permit for the, did they have permit for the trees that grading and tree removal?
They have
Mr. Virgin, do they have a permit for?
I have no knowledge of any radio tournament engineering approval, but there's definitely a prayer.
So I think you can, I'm sorry.
But it's Commissioner Herbert finish and then we'll go.
Yeah, that was, yes.
So, can I,
Commissioner Gray.
so Mr. Irwin, if they're removing trees, do they not have to mitigate those tree removals before they can do anything?
That's something I need to explore as to what exactly being on the property. They're gone, now I have to identify what on the property.
And to the best of your ability, is that okay?
The mitigation.
And if I remember correctly, when I discussed this case with this particular applicant prior to Ms. Herbert's assignment, there was a consideration being made for land to be given to the city for green space and park. Has that not been discussed with you?
That has not been a problem.
So then they are requesting that the complete utilization would be to cut all the trees down. And, or I guess that would be a question for the applicant. Okay, and with the way that the city expresses the desire to replace trees that are clear cut like in this particular area, would that be something that this particular applicant would need to consider before doing any clear cutting and tree mitigation?
If we consider, we should have permanent applications for any project that goes out, that involves tree clearing. The trees are, the site's disturbed, so now they have to go back and identify what's there.
Okay, then thank you very much, Mr. Irwin. Ms. Garza, is that that's right? Yeah, Ms. Garza. Unfortunately, I apologize. So, would there be any consideration with this particular application to add enough buffering to was any consideration given to add enough buffering to protect the residential proximity that is already there, or any way to protect those residents from going
back into the trucks from going, the commercial trucks going back into the residential neighborhood opposed to going straight out to 12? What's that better, which is the 12? To prevent the trucks, was there any consideration about anything to prevent the truck from going down Duncanville Road opposed to going north to West Ledbetter and going either east or west on Ledbetter?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
As far as what looks like a commercial motor vehicle parking lot between the site and the mobile park, they don't have an SUP. I mean, they wouldn't, but that is commercial motor vehicle parking, which certainly appears to be from the area. They wouldn't have an SUP because within 500 feet of residential. Do we know? It's not on the list, so it's coded heavy machinery and equipment, but that doesn't appear to be what they do.
No.
I'll do some research.
Commissioner Young?
Mr. Irwin, just to be clear, since that is vacant residentially zoned property, it is depends on the city code for them to cut down a protected tree without previously getting a tree removal permit.
That's correct, whether it's residential or commercial.
Okay. So, if there are protected trees coming down and no permit is an issue, that's a problem with it, later mitigate or not.
Correct.
Thank you, Commissioner. And unfortunately, Mr. Irwin has lots of practice going back and doing that work. Article 10 does some that kind of language and allows us to go back and use historical pictures and there's others. Entire process. Commissioner Young.
He's a forensic arborist.
Quite a job, Chad.
He left his laptop at home today.
Yeah, he left
His laptop at home.
and he brought up his overcoat with the spyglass.
That's right. Any last questions on this project, commissioners? Okay, we'll keep going. Thank you very much, Ms. Barnes. Good job.
You'll set the date.
Move that
Got it.
So stay in District 3 and we'll go to Dr. Uday.
Good morning. Item C 223-189 is a renewal and amendment of specific use permit number 2308 for the sale of alcoholic beverages in conjunction with a general merchandise or food store that is less than 3,500 square feet. The property is on RR Regional Retail District and has a B1 liquor control overlay on it. And it's on the north side of West Camp Wisdom Road, east of Marvin Hill Freeway. And it's 0.34 acres. It's in far southwest Dallas. As you can see on the aerial, the property, like on the, I'm not sharing. I apologize. Okay, I'm just gonna like shuffle through the slides just for the people online that I already said all of these things. So we were here. Apologize. The property highlighted in blue is the subject property, is a 2-unit little retail strip. We're talking about the unit to the left. That's the one that's going to sell the alcohol, or it's already selling the alcohol. It's surrounded by a gas station that also has an SUP for alcohol sales, undeveloped land to the east, to the north, a combination of business, commercial, and hotel motel. Across the street to the south, it's auto-related uses, retail, and a little bit of undevelopment by the creek. The background, the property had an SUP back in 2015. That's where it was rezoned from B to B1 liquor control overlay, but that SUP expired in 2017. This SUP that's being renewed today was initially approved in 2019. It was renewed once in 2021, and this is their third, basically, SUP. They have a CO since 2014. As I said, it's a one-story building. The building itself is less than 3,500 square feet. It has 2 units, and it's a general merchandise food store. The unit to the right, to the east, is currently vacant. This is a little bit of a wider angle of both the property and the gas station. This is the property to the east, gas station to the west. This is across the street. The SUP conditions pretty normal. They are asking for 3 years with 5-year auto renewals. This is the site plan. They propose absolutely no changes. Usually with renewals, kind of like go along with the existing site plan on the record. So staff recommendation is the same as the applicant, 3-year for, and then eligibility for automatic renewals for 5-year period, subject to conditions.
Thank you very much. Questions, Commissioner Blair?
Are you aware that there is a lot of vagrancy, for lack of a better word, hanging out? It's a homeless encampment area, and the homeless, they can't handle a lot of that location.
It's not necessarily related to the land use, but the major rationale and the connection.
I can. Let me see if I can connect the dots there. There is a 7-Eleven right next door to it that does not have the same type of issue. So as a land use, this is a good use, the highest and best use of this particular land, based on the operation of 7-Eleven next door and the operation which at this location, 7-Eleven does not have the same type of behavior and activity as this particular location. Is this not a good use of land to allow more liquor sales when they are not operating in a fashion that is community focused, opposed to bringing in activities that are not conducive to the needs of the community?
You made the opposite point probably than the one that you wanted to say, because the property next door actually, again, the land use is the same land use next door, and it basically goes back to operator again. Okay. Other complaints, I would say.
Thank you.
This case is on consent.
We'll take it off.
We'll take it off, okay? Sure. Yeah, that's it. It's falling apart. Commissioner Carpenter, please.
Was made a fire for their SUP in the middle back in January, before January, it expired. We're just seeing it now. Did you take the longest time to pass it?
It stayed 11 in the queue, so it took a little bit of time to be assigned to me. I will give that, and we know about that too. And it did take a little bit to have the convenience store license inspection.
Okay, one more question. When these come up for auto renewal, does the staff check the status of the development?
For auto renewals?
Because the recommendation here is for them to get auto renewal, and if they're having
trouble. I think so. I had this conversation with the auto renewal team. I think so. We wait for that, and then we check the section. Yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Herbert, please.
So, this question kind of general, but when we're looking at land use and we see that there's beer and wine usage already being utilized next door, across the street, across the highway, 2 blocks down, are we not allowed to look at those other uses?
Sure, but I would say look at the compatibility and the impact on the surroundings.
Okay.
And you have like, that's what we do. Like we look at the surroundings and estimate what is the impact of this particular land use that we have under consideration.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, we'll keep moving. Number 4.
Item number 4, Z212-237 is an application for an amendment to land development district number 543 to allow remodeling of outdoor space areas for 2 public schools, J.L. Long Middle School and Wilson High School campus. The area is a big block bounded by Reader Avenue, Paulus Avenue, Pocklington Lane, and North Glasgow Drive. It's a little bit over 18 acres. It is in East Dallas. As you can see on the aerial, both schools share the same campus. J.L. Long is on the northeast side, Woodrow Wilson is southwest side. It's surrounded by a combination of multifamily, single-family, and duplex uses, and then by a park to the southwest. And again, zoning district's a combination of D, EMF, little BD, and R districts. It's a big campus. I took like probably 100 pictures. I'm not gonna put all of them. I just focused on the area where there are changes. So the main change will be at this corner, basically between Paulus and Covington Lane. That's the parking lot that belongs to J.L. Long that they are proposing to remodel. So this is the corner. This is a view from Covington to see the entire facade of the school. This is J.L. Long. This is basically the parking lot we're talking about. Across the street, multifamily. A better view of the entrance to J.L. Long. Moving a little bit on Covington, the same, another view of the parking lot. You can see there's a curb cut in here. The proposal is to take this curb cut away and create a new one on Paulus. Further down on Covington Lane, because I feel like all the improvements are more impacting this side. I don't feel this is how it is. It's impacting more the Covington Lane side. This is the Woodrow Wilson. I think it's a shared athletic field where they are proposing to add 4 light poles. Further south on Covington Lane, this is another view of the athletic field. They're proposing to add 2 on each side of the field. And this is another more wide view of Covington Lane to see the residential single-family uses and how close they are and how narrow Covington is. Again, across the street, single-family homes. This is the existing development plan. As you can see, this is J.L. Long. This is their parking lot with the curb cutting here. There used to be a multitude of portable structures. This is the athletic field. The proposal, and I have them, and this is as briefed. You received a revised last night. The only change from what's in the docket is a note on the site plan. So this is just to see side by side. The proposed as brief. As I was saying, the curb cut on Covington is being eliminated, rerouted to Paulus. The parking lot is being remodeled, take away a few parking spots to gain a little bigger practice field, but that's not going to be, to my understanding, is going to be an open space. And as you can see, all the portables, almost all of them, only 3 are a remainder on the site on the development plan. And then what else? Oh, the note on the J.L. Long surface lot says that parking should be used for Woodrow Wilson High School. And then on the athletic field, I didn't like this red dots because they're very tiny. This is the location of the 4 proposed light poles. The TMP that was approved with the PD was for both of them, but more focused on Woodrow Wilson. In the meantime, they submitted revisions to that to staff. the proposed one is looking more into how it's gonna affect, this change is gonna affect the circulation on Jail Long. This is what is being shown. Basically, the buses are gonna be more focused on Paulus and Covington North rather than the Covington Lane that's shared with the single family. The PD conditions I highlighted in green, the changes from the docket. You received these conditions yesterday. Very good improvements from what is in the docket. The changes are revised floor area to reflect the portables. It's a little bit of it was a little bit counterintuitive for me. We didn't used to include them, now we did. So that's what the square footage, it doesn't imply any addition to the square footage of the buildings. It's just the whole match with the portables. Revised parking to reduce from 538 to 514 spaces to account for what is being lost with parking lot of Jail Long. Reserved managed parking supply, the note, addition of EV charging stations, addition of the requirement for minimum 20 parking spaces for micromobility and one charging outlet for those. The TMG language is further updated to basically say that the revisions are going to be done in March 2026. Now for the light standards, the request is to have 80-foot high poles. There is an additional clarification to say that RPS does not apply only to poles. Hours of operation are changed from what's in the docket, and it's basically 6 days a week, 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. They limit the use of the athletic fuels to students of the two campuses. And then there's a condition to say that the hours for all outdoor lights basically apply the same on the entire campus. Then the PD proposes pedestrian amenities for 3 areas. I would say that 2 of them already exist, which is great. The revised one, or changed one, 4 trash cans on Covington Lane, bike racks for the 10 bicycles can count towards the micromobility requirement, and then a condition to prohibit amplified sound between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. at night. This being said, staff recommendation is approval subject to a revised Exhibit A, which is the development plan, a revised Exhibit B, the traffic management plan, and revised conditions as briefed.
Very much. Questions? Commissioner Young?
Yes.
He had a meeting at 9:30, so
okay.
he said he's gonna come up.
All right, well, I can just come 1:30.
Okay, we'll wait for that for the hearing. Commissioner Carpenter and Commissioner Hess.
I know the building code, the international building code is changing, evolving about EV spaces. Is the general building code requiring EV spaces at schools?
Oh, I think so. I'll go back and look into that. I think it's for all non-commercial limits.
Doesn't UISD have a policy that they want to include EV parking spaces at every campus by 2030?
I would think so. We've been constantly including this in PDs and SUPs. I would like to get it.
This is PD requires one, but the building requires 11 chapters.
I think if is the most restrictive that applies. So I would say that this is a minimum one. So basically it's going to be for the building code.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, one clarification on the lighting standards, the 4 poles that are right behind, there's a provision that says residential proximity does not apply to the lights. That's captured within the 4 athletic standards. Is it correct? It's only intended to apply to those 4.
Okay. Yeah, and thank you for the clarification. I mean, I don't think it would have gotten into issues with yeah, but it's good.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? Okay, we'll go to case number 5 and 6. Ms. Munoz, good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Please let me know if you can see my screen.
I think it's coming up. We can see it.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So this is the combined briefing for cases Z212-298 and Z212-332. I would like to just advise CPC that there have been no changes made to these two cases since you last saw them in August. So these applications we have are both for ACS Commercial Service District with consideration of an MU1 mixed use district, and the property is zoned an agricultural district currently. There are two areas of request. Both are located on the north line of Dowdy Ferry Road, northeast of LBJ. And the first is approximately 51.88 acres, and the second is just over 2 acres. Here's the approximate location of the site, the southeast. And then here's an aerial map showing you those two parcels. So the larger request site of 298 that contains over 50 acres, and then the smaller site that fronts along Dowdy Ferry, which is where they propose to have a fueling station and general merchandise or food store. Here is the zoning map showing that those two parcels are currently agricultural. To the north, we do have an industrial research district that has deed restrictions, which I'll share with you later. And then farther to the north, we do have additional ag, as well as to the west, where we have a variety of residential and public park uses and some undeveloped land. The property to the north with the IR district and the deed restrictions previously housed a batch plant, but upon my site visit, it did show that that property was for sale. So I'm not aware of whether or not it's currently being operated. Farther to the east of the site, there is additional single-family uses, and then to the south, we have agricultural and single-family district. Both of those are undeveloped. So for 298, that's the larger of the two request areas. This is currently undeveloped land that's zoned ag, and it has significant natural features running through the land. The applicant is proposing to develop the site with any permitted uses within the CS district and has expressed a particular interest in warehouse or other commercial and industrial uses that are permitted by the requested district. For 332, more specifically, they have this goal of developing the site with the general merchandise or food store and fueling station, which is permitted by right in the proposed CS district. However, it's also permitted in the alternative MU district, and it would alleviate the potential to have any other non-compatible uses at this site. So the rezoning to an MU would still permit them to develop it as they're seeking to, but it would remove any non-compatible uses per the area plans and adjacent land uses for compatibility purposes. So the CS district specifically allows several heavy commercial and light industrial uses that could have major impacts on the adjacent natural resources, including a part of the floodplain and surrounding existing residential uses. Alternatively, as I mentioned, the MU1 district will allow them to build out one site that they already have more cemented with their proposed land use, and then permit the remaining acreage to be developed with a variety of land uses that are more consistent with both the area plan as well as the natural features of the area and the surrounding land uses that exist. Here are the surrounding land uses. This is the site when we're actually, this is the property itself. We're looking at the north end of the property. So the greater amount of acreage, you see the zoning sign located right there on the fence. And then this is as we turn right onto Dowdy Ferry, looking northeast onto the site. And these are the surrounding land uses. This is off of Dowdy Ferry looking east. There is a residential neighborhood there. with several single-family homes that were built prior to the 50s. And this is what they currently are abutting, looking over to this metal fencing that separates that IR district from these residential uses in the agricultural district. And then this is that cement or concrete batch plant that was permitted in that IR district. As you can see at the time of my site visit, it was for sale. And that's just a view into that property. And now this is another view of the site closer to the smaller site. Now we're at the I-20 intersection of Dowdy Ferry. And now I've taken you back to the west side of Dowdy Ferry to look at those adjacent land uses, agricultural in nature or undeveloped, followed by the public park. Beautiful park if you haven't been out there. Development standards for the existing AA district. An obvious change is the setbacks, of course. AA is meant to be large open lots that are used for single family and agricultural uses, and those single family uses or lot size in general has a minimum acreage requirement, and for that reason these lots are open and give a lot of opportunity for wide open spaces, but that also includes keeping those wide open spaces by having large setbacks. So that would be changed with both the CS and the MU1 district as proposed. Now, the density obviously is completely different because in the CS district, there's no residential uses permitted, but there are floor area ratio requirements for the variety of uses that are permitted. The height overall would change to, being 24-foot maximum to 45 feet if the CS district, or up to 120 if they had a mix of uses and qualified as a mixed-use project under the MU1 district. However, there are adjacent single-family properties that would still impose RPS onto this site. So they would still have to comply with that. But it's such a large amount of acreage that in either scenario, they would be able to build up to a really good height. Now, the lot coverage, again, the AA district is all about that wide open space and having that green space. So it's a very, very low lot coverage of 10% for residential or 25% for non-residential. And both the proposed districts are going up to 80. One thing I didn't mention on the density for the MU1 that's in lieu is that, of course, it permits residential uses, which is in line with not only the surrounding land uses, but also the area plans. And of course, our need throughout this city to encourage more residential development. Now, other special standards that apply are for these taller structures in both the proposed and the in lieu districts. There are provisions for visual intrusion and then urban form setback and tower spacing for the taller structures in MU district. Overall, it's the primary uses that are permitted that have an even larger variety of differences between these three districts than what I've just described in those development standards, which were pretty large to begin with. Agricultural and single family are the two uses allowed existing today. If it were to be changed to a CS district, we'd be opening up a very large tract of land that has direct access to the floodplain and creekway system to heavier commercial and business service uses. Of course, it would allow a variety of supporting retail and personal service uses in office that would be supportive to the neighborhood. But if their goal is to develop this site with commercial and business service uses, with warehouses and other large format industrial uses, that could have a potential negative impact on this area. Overall, the MU1 district provides a good balance between that and gives them a variety of prospective land uses. So when the applicant who is selling this property and trying to obtain zoning so that the site is a better more easy to describe, accessible land uses is what they seem to be going after. And in my opinion, for this area, of course, with the area plans in consideration and those surrounding land uses, my professional opinion is that an MU1 district makes more sense. These are the adjacent deed restrictions on the property to the north. Deed restrictions are a good mechanism to ensure that we qualify a proposed district by removing potentially incompatible uses or development standards. However, that is not something that's ever required by staff. It is a negotiation mechanism that is used through CPC and council with the applicants. Furthermore, in staff's opinion, it does open up an area to that base zoning district and allow for the further degradation of the overall zoning in the region. And this is because deed restrictions are a separate mechanism that can be altered. And memory fades, people leave, and then all of a sudden things are being changed. And what we have to look at the end of the day as staff members a lot of the time is what was the base recommendation if they approved an IR district. An IR district must be compatible and or suitable for this area. It must be what the neighborhood wanted at the time. And then that's why I say it can lead to further degradation of the base zoning for the area, for the whole neighborhood. So while it may be a good mechanism for making arguments or, trying to finish a case and negotiating down, it can also cause issues overall. And that's what we're seeing here is the applicant feels that it's suitable to encourage further industrial zoning here, despite it not meeting the area plan goals or surrounding land uses. They feel that because there is this existing IR district to the north, then it should be suitable to have a CS district, another industrial district, immediately to the south with much larger acreage opportunity for development. And staff just does not agree. So for consistency review purposes, to share with you those area plans as noted in my reports, there's the I-20 Freeway Corridor Land Use Plan, which shows these properties as being in Subdistrict 2 and shows that they are as retail or commercial areas. It also identifies the surrounding areas having significant natural open space or due to the presence of the Prairie Creek and Trinity River having a sensitivity. So the proposed CS district is not consistent with the character as called for by the plan. There are no industrial uses permitted or recommended in the Subdistrict 2. However, there is an appropriate place for them in the majority of Subdistrict 1, which is to the southeast of I-20 on both sides of Bonneview Road. This is not this area. And because of that, the plan recommends to keep those industrial uses in Subdistrict 1 and have this more residential commercial neighborhood base in Subdistrict 2, which is where we're located and what we're looking at. And for that reason, staff recommends an MU1 district, which would balance the existing land uses and the proposed commercial nature that's suggested to be added by this plan. It will also promote the investment into the adjacent public park and trail system, which is the Great Trinity Forest Gateway Park and Horse Trails. And it would be respectful of the low density single family uses in the vicinity. For that reason, staff recommendations on these two cases is denial of the CS district because those area plans do not support the industrial zoning. There is residential adjacency and there are natural features in floodplain to take into consideration. Staff recommends approval instead in lieu of a CS district. We recommend approval of an MU1 district. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions, Commissioner Blair?
Ms. Munoz, thank you so much for the very in-depth presentation of both 298 and 332. I have a few questions. And I'm going to need to take them separately instead of doing them together. At 298, were you, with both of them, were you aware? Well, I was under the impression, and can you confirm that Mr. Coker had changed, the directions have been changed from a CS to an MU1 in both locations. And that the restrictions were offered up in both locations. So
as I noted at the start of my presentation, there have been no amendments to these cases.
All right, let me ask Mr. Irwin. And Mr. Irwin, I think we had a brief conversation out in the hallway, just put it on the record. Did you have a conversation with this particular applicant about given a 22-acre conservation area and both to 98 was referred to?
Can't say for certain I've had conversations. The plan itself.
Which was?
But we did case that was south of 20. The case that was south of 20, there was a conversation about conservation easement that case did not move forward, correct?
That's correct.
But and this is the same applicant. It's just one is north 20 and one is south 20, correct? Yeah. So if the applicant was providing a conservation easement, donating 22 acres of that, Ms. Munoz, can you put back up your picture where you had the where the greens, where all the trees and what area of the development of the applicant's case was being developed for me, please? And I apologize that you didn't get the same memo that I got. It sure would have made life easier here.
It looks like it's taking a second to load.
Yeah. Here.
I'm sharing it. I hope it loads soon. Just
okay, so when you see where the creek is and that where it goes down, yeah, all that, would that not be considered part of the 22? That would be considered part of the 22-acre conservation easement, and the area of consideration for both 298 and well, essentially 298. I don't know about 332. It would be if it was considered as an MU1. I just okay. Ms. Munoz, I understand that the deed restrictions were submitted to you guys Tuesday, so we haven't gotten those yet. That's all right. Thank you. I think that I know what I need to do in order to continue. We're going to hold this case.
Okay. Both of them. Okay. Date.
October the second break would be in October.
Yes, thank you.
Ms. Munoz, I will have a conversation with you and the applicant so that we're all on the same page. Is that fair? Is that okay with you, please?
Of course.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. I want to take you guys' time here.
Over 19. Commissioner, you have any questions?
I'll pass.
Okay. Any other questions, sir? We will keep going. Number 7.
Thank you.
Thank you. And with you, Ms. Williams.
Okay, please let me know when you can see my screen.
Not yet. Okay, yes.
Okay, just to update you, this case was previously briefed on July the 6th, but there are some revisions since that date. On August the 7th, the applicant did submit a revised site plan showing a proposed emergency access gate with a 6-foot gate at the eastern Sheila Lane frontage. Please forgive my error in my report where I confused my east from my west. Furthermore, they proposed amended site plan landscape items. They're showing the existing 21 cedar elm trees running along Sheila Lane all across down to the west, southward on Lakefield Boulevard frontages, but they include proposed parking lot screening at a height of 3 feet along both street frontages. Here is the revised plan, and I've marked it up and increased the size here for you to see that now that truck traffic is entering on Lakefield and entering the site here as previously suggested, but now they've gotten the green light to turn left here onto Sheila rather than coming out as staff had proposed through a slip road along the inside of the inventory storage area and accessing this, what is now proposed as emergency access only. That is a new driveway entrance on the eastern portion of their Sheila frontage. Initially, staff had proposed for them to exit this way and head northbound, but that was not seen as a good alternative. Instead, they worked with Mr. Nevadas, the applicant, and of course our commissioner, to come up with this plan, which has been accepted by all parties. So now truck traffic would enter Lakefield, enter the site, come into this waiting area that is screened off with a security fence 6 feet in height. There is a vehicle gate, but I don't think that's enough maneuvering space for a semi. And then they come out onto Sheila Lane and turn left to exit. Those are the changes associated with this request, and staff recommendation is still for approval of the amendment to the development, Plan Development District number 37, subject to revised conditions with the removal of that requirement for a development plan and approval of an amendment to that existing SUP and renewal for the vehicle auction and storage use for a 5-year period, subject to eligibility for automatic renewals for additional 5-year periods, subject to this revised site plan and revised conditions.
Thank you very much. Questions? No questions. We'll go to number 8.
Thank you.
This one, has this been briefed before?
105, yes, it was, but it has two very minor updates. If you want to, I can.
Please.
Just 3 slides I have. Which are basically corrections from unsolved issues last time. Can you see the screen? So the site plan was revised to add the walk-in cooler. I worked with the applicant, told us that they have permits for that for the past few years. It's outside of the right of way, so there's the revision to the site plan, and also the uncovered patio is showing the correct. The previous site plan was 800 feet, now it's 704, and then the conditions are revised to include a provision to prohibit the rooftop patios during 8 hours. So these are the 2 changes. This is an aerial where you can see this is counting. There was a discussion last time, so I wanted to.
Commissioner Rubin, please.
Can you just refresh me? I've slept a few times since our July meeting. The concern about the walk-in cooler was that it wasn't on the development plan, but it was existing?
Yes, and there was also a concern that it is in the right of way of the alley.
Okay.
And then kind of like caught me unexpected because there are like.
He had a conflict on another one. Yeah. So he has a conflict on 14, I thought.
So it was just, you see, there are like 4 units in that building, and we didn't know is what the clerk for this unit. When I did my site visit, I noticed all of those, but I also didn't know is it for this unit or not. And the applicant confirmed it's for this unit and it's permitted and it's outside of the right of it.
Is it blocking the alley in any way?
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you.
We're watching out for you, Commissioner Kinsler. Any other questions on this one, Commissioners? Number 8.
I do plan.
Please, Commissioner Kinsler.
I plan a little bit.
Oh, you're holding a pen. Sorry. October.
The second, no, the second October. Yeah. I don't have to check it's October.
Yeah. It's 9/7 and it's on time.
It's not right.
Okay, so we'll hold that. Advisement to the
Are we breaking everything?
Yeah, just already had a couple of quick changes. Any questions on this item? Go to number 9.
Michael? I can, if you want, I can brief 10.
10 is going to be held under advisement to September 21st.
Okay, and no briefing?
And no briefing.
Okay.
Number 11 is also going to be held to September 21st.
September?
September 21st. So we're still on 9. So on 9 but 12.
Yes, to the next one. To the next one you said, right?
To number 9?
No, to 9, to 10.
10 is giving 10.
The next one's 21st.
Oh, yes. Next. 12 held to the 21st.
Tanya, I didn't know.
Moving on. Item 9, 212115. This is an application for a specific use permit for commercial motor vehicle parking on properties zoned at CSD1 Commercial Service District with a D1 liquor control overlay on the north line of Silverado Drive with CF Pond and Clayburg Road. It's 1.2 acres. It is located off of CF Pond, southeast Dallas. Here's the site aerial view. And so as for the surrounding uses, there's motor vehicle fueling station, vehicle display sales and service to the northeast. There's some vehicle display sales and service to the east. An undeveloped parcel across Silverado to the southeast, and single family to the south and southwest. And then there's machinery, heavy truck equipment or truck sales and service to the northwest. And the area request is currently built out as a surface parking facility in Zone CS Commercial Service District. The use of commercial motor vehicle parking is permitted by right in the district, but it requires an SUP within 500 feet of a residential district, which this property will be. And the applicant proposes a site plan with a commercial motor vehicle parking facility with 14 truck parking spaces surrounded by a fence, access from Silverado Drive. Commercial motor vehicle parking is defined in Chapter 151A as a facility for the temporary, daily, or overnight parking of commercial motor vehicles as defined in the use regulations for a truck stop and or motor vehicles with 2 or more rear axles, such as trucks, truck tractors, and similar vehicles for no charge or for a fee, regardless of whether that fee is being charged independently or any other use on the lot. The parking is not accessory to a main use on the lot. Wordy, but important. So to get down to the site, here's the site in Silverado with some truck parking on it right now. This is also more of a site looking west. Now we're looking north. That's going to be that's going to be beyond the entrance to this site. It's going to be a different facility. Now this is right looking in, I think, the driveway. And this is the eastmost part of this site with trucks. And kind of the whole length of the site going over to the western property line as it's used today. Looking south, west down at Silverado, you can see residential property to your left. This property is undeveloped. It's CS with deed restriction, but it's undeveloped. And then there's commercial truck parking over there to the east with the subject property right to my left. It's the adjacency with the residential use and the proposed use on the right. And then across Silverado, there's residential use there. Entrance to another residential property to my right. Now I've gone back. This is kind of the flyover that Silverado has over CF Pond. Some other truck parking uses. That's the other one. That's a truck stop that exists today. There is past the subject property that sign there. I guess I noted, but that's after the entrance to the property. Here's the site plan as it's proposed, where they enter from Silverado, and there's 14 spaces along the western boundary, and fence around the exterior. Propose the conditions for the typical requesting 2 years eligibility for 2-year item renewal after that point. The lighting limitation that points away from residential adjoining property. Parking areas screened with an 8-foot high and solid screening fence. And the other typical staff recommendation is denial.
Thank you, sir. Question, Commissioner Blair.
And he's Mr. Pepe.
Yes.
Were you aware that there were that there was an active code violation being pursued on this particular property?
That's what we're saying, yes.
Are you aware that this property is part of 3 addresses, all connected to the same property owner?
Yes.
And were you aware that 2 of the 3 all have the same code violations?
Yes, I believe so.
And that 2 of the 3 are also in one step before going to community prosecution for the code violations.
Yeah.
So I know I'm going to look.
For our folks online, that was one of the.
I pushed my limit. So, Mr. Pepe, in order to make this, if the applicant wants to make this site work, would not there be considered? Thank you. That's the best picture in the world. The picture works that or that's Silverado, correct?
Yeah. The road on our left.
Silverado, and has a curved gutter.
No, no.
And it's not conducive for truck traffic, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And that road leads, Silverado leads straight to Cleaver Road, correct?
Well, quarter mile.
Okay. I think that's enough. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Young.
Following up on Commissioner Blair's questions, does this site have a CO of any kind?
No. This site does not have a CO.
And that is itself a violation of the code.
SEO for what?
SEO for anything. Single family, lead smelting, for anything.
Single family does not require SEOs,
Okay.
but because I wanted to make a comment that, I always say that if the CO would be for the use that would be allowed, like what do we issue the CO based on? And then if there is a violation and they're coming for turn zoning change or for the SUPs, they're showing that to see I'm trying to come into compliance. So we need to always balance that.
Well, how long has the use been in place, especially now?
So actually, these pictures take a long time. I want to say these were taken 1.5 years ago when I took these photos. However, I've been back, condition up here similar. And then
I'm more interested in going back further.
I got you.
2 years ago, 22 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And that's historical area. That's when I brought up those pictures that you're seeing were from then. This aerial, I believe, is from either 2019 or 2020.
So it looks like the ask is pretty recent. Yes. In the fullness of time.
Yes.
Okay. And there is the only use on the lot at present is the parking of commercial vehicles. So that's not accessory to any other thing.
It's an individual lot. Yes. So I don't see it as accessory because it's on another lot. No other use present on that lot. And we talked about in the definition of commercial motor vehicle on the lot. So
okay, so this isn't even a CO for a commercial parking lot that is being misused for commercial vehicles, as we sometimes see.
No, it is not that. I understood your question. No, it's not CO'd for commercial motor vehicle parking. Or I think we're talking because commercial motor vehicle parking, talking about truck parking.
Right.
You're thinking
I'm thinking
a
of
lot.
Commercial parking lot or garage.
Commercial parking lot or garage. It is not that.
It's not that, nor does it even pretend to be.
It's not based on the fact that
I think I would be this dead or
it is dead. And it's buried.
Yeah.
Which way is it?
So, did I hear right that it is allowed by right and just be saved and should be?
It is.
Right.
Broadly in CS, commercial motor vehicle parking is a by right use, but it requires an SUP when it's in 500 feet of residential district, as this site is. So we evaluated it's not by right on this property.
Yeah. So, is there any uses similar to that in proximity to this location?
There are similar uses farther to the east. They may either be, and I won't speak to the status of those properties. Those ones are CS. Many of them are further from residential property because your residential property is south of this one. You see the black line cutting through a diagonal in the middle. That's your residential zoning. So there are, as I said, some further east along Sia Pond, similar uses. I don't know the status as if each of those have been measured as 500 feet, so I won't speak to them. But there are some other similar uses to the east. This is a different.
And also proximity to residential.
Those are I would say more separated. The ones to the east are more separated. You can kind of see that occurring here.
Is there a way, can you ask why staff recommendation for the house?
Yeah, absolutely. There's an adjacent residential use to this one. Remember, it's triggered by zoning and not use that 500 feet thing. However, a lot of this area was built out before CS zoning potentially. So you see residential in some of the CS zoning that I, as a planner, would say, although it's zoned CS, it deserves consideration as existing residential. When we look at, is it an appropriate adjacency? Is it not? That played in. And so you see that right there on Silverado to the southwest adjacency to this lot is a generally residential use. It is commercial zoning, but then catty corner to the south, that's a residentially zoned, residentially used property. And so that's what influenced the decision, as well as the infrastructure on the street when you enter the site, and the conditions as proposed. I don't think they necessarily forward the adjacency, or excuse me, the appropriateness.
So there's no instances that can be created that will not, that on any part of the property, so that will allow for them to have use there? I mean, to have entrance into the property?
The property can be developed now in any other CS commercial use. We determine this.
This particular is that because is the issue that because of the proximity to the residential, is there another way into the property that the applicant can offer the deed restriction for access that will limit the contact with those of residential properties?
It doesn't front any other public streets, is what I'll say. They would have to negotiate to get other kinds of access. They would have to negotiate with other private property owners. But this is the only public street that it fronts, or could possibly feasibly have ingress egress from.
Mr. President, a large adjoining commercial motor vehicle parking lot that's 2105 Silverado. Are you aware they don't have a CO for any use whatsoever at that location?
Last time I checked with code enforcement, they were CO'd as machinery, heavy equipment, or truck sales and service, which is actually a high right.
But that's not what that is.
I won't speak to the operations on the adjacent site, but last time you spoke to code enforcement, that was what their CO is for.
Okay, that's just if this is a commercial motor vehicle parking lot, they would also have to have an SUP because of the proximity to residential.
Questions, how deep those lots?
It's
But the adjoining the CS single.
I haven't measured from that other property to the residential to the southeast. But yeah, it's behind this property.
Do we know if the applicant for this side in question is the same operator as the?
My understanding is it's the same owner.
The property is 260 feet deep, so that would put the northwestern property within 500 feet of the land.
That is catty corner, yeah. Because I mean, you'd be using Silverado as your generator of that 500 feet. So looks like yes. But I just will say the machinery, heavy equipment, or truck sales and services of by right CS use.
It's dead, right?
Yeah.
But
If that's what's going on, it may not be.
If there were commercial motor vehicle parking, they would have to have an SUP because they would be within the 500 feet.
Those have been curious.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners? Well, anyway, again, cases 10 or 11 are being held on advisement on the 21st. Case number 12 was the record reflected Administrator Young conflict on the side.
No,
13 conflict. Okay.
12?
Number 12.
So we're not going to break 10 or 11.
James, share. PowerPoints. Share. Okay, this is Z223112. This is multi-part application. One, for a specific use permit for a motor vehicle fueling station, and two, a specific use permit for the sale of alcoholic beverages in conjunction with a general merchandise or food store 3,500 square feet or less on property zone sub-district 5 within planned development district number 533 to CF on special purpose district number 1. And it has the D1 liquor control overlay. And this is the southwest corner of ELM and CF on freeway. It's just barely over a half acre. That stars should be farther up than CF on. But this is at CF on and Elam. Elam. Yeah, right. Thank you. Absolutely. And then the Buckner station is a little bit farther to the east for reference. So here's the separate site. Those are the parcels as requested. Currently undeveloped. And it runs along US 175 on. There's an undeveloped site across Elam to the north. There's some single family to the west. And then there's an auto service center that sort of wraps around this parcel to the west, southwest. And there's a vehicle display sales and services use to the southeast. And the area request is currently zoned subject to 5 within the PB 33. And it does have the D1 liquor control overlay. It's currently undeveloped. They're proposing a new motor vehicle station, fueling station with an associated general merchandise or food store, 3,500 square feet or less. General merchandise or food store is permitted by right, but clarify. And then among the permitted uses in the PD, motor vehicle fueling station is permitted in this sub-district only with the SUP. And the property is also in that D1, and so should they develop a general merchandise or food store, and they did want to sell alcohol, they would need this SUP, and so they requested both of these things in conjunction. And staff recommends denial based on proximity to nearby residential properties, as well as the challenge the site may face in meeting city requirements. So here's the site plan. What can I say? It has site plan depicts an entrance on CF Pond and one on Elam as well. They have gas pumps parallel to CF Pond. And then they put their retail building on the southeastern portion of the property. And when I get down to the site, it's undeveloped at this time. You can kind of see they built a fence around the property line. So you can kind of visualize that jog where the property line bends back into this flag sort of orientation. And there's that deeper part of the lot pictured. The site from Elam, the Elam intersections, actually, you can see it on the right. And now we're looking northwest up the freeway. And then intersection generally pictured there. The underpass of CF Pond Freeway. And farther east. Now this is the southeastmost portion of the property where it abuts a vehicle sales and service use. Proposed conditions, we've got one each for the use and the alcohol sales within the general merchandise food store. So must comply with site plan, ultimately the typical, and then they request 3 years period. Outdoor speakers prohibited, and that's all the conditions. And then for the general merchandise or food store, they also request 3 years, maximum floor area 3,500 square feet, and outside speakers prohibited. Staff recommendation is one.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Blair. Well, Commissioner.
Yes, is it in this particular matter because that The main reason why the recommendation of denial is the fact is the entry points in the setup of this particular lot, is that correct?
Yes, the size and orientation of the lot, I would say, make it difficult to develop given the nature of the use.
Its use.
Motor vehicle station requires a good amount of space for the canopies, the building, and associated parking.
So as long as this is the design standard that this applicant is using, this is not, even if we were to try to move this forward, it would not be permitted. It would have a difficult time getting permitted, going through the permitting process to build it with this layout, correct?
Yes, and I can elaborate on that if I may. One of them being the entrance on Elam is closer to the intersection than would be permitted under street design manual. It's quite close. I don't have the distance, but it should be closer to 100 feet in distance. So it's quite a close driveway to that intersection. That said, there's not too many alternatives. So we did inform them of this, but they did not respond with any changes or alterations, because it is potentially unlikely that they might be able to find another spot for that. They also have landscaping requirements that are required to by the PD between the frontage streets and the property where service parking begins. They don't generally have room for that because of where the property lines are and the amount of space that needs to be taken up by canopy, parking, and drive-bys around them.
So they would not be, in this design standard, they cannot meet Article 10 as, well, no, they can't meet the
additional landscaping requirements of the PD. Yeah.
And there was no alternate offered by the applicant in order to mitigate that issue?
Yeah. No. And I don't see it as feasible due to the small size of the fire.
So even if they didn't make that decision again, but based on the size of this particular layout of this particular lot, this is just a difficult use to be placed at this particular site.
Wow, meeting city code, yes.
Thank you.
I'm not sure where that.
Where the X was the premium use prior to tear down the gas station?
That's my understanding, is that there was a gas station in a previous iteration that was demolished.
How long you got it?
I don't have a timing on it.
Pretty recently, maybe
Over 2 years.
Yes, please, Commissioner Young.
Following up on Commissioner Blair's question, looking at the site plan on page 1211, you've identified 3 problems with that. One is that they're 1 parking space short. That might or might not be fixable with an alternative site plan, right?
That's a fine way to put it.
Likewise, the required 10-foot landscape buffer is going to take up more space into 1 parking lot, but that might or might not be fixable with a revised site plan.
Yes.
All right. But the deal breaker, if you will, is the driveway distance, which is jammed up toward the intersection between the street and the freeway service road.
The amount of property here is limited, so I don't see how that driveway would get farther west. So
well,
yes.
that's where I'm headed next. There is a driveway to the motor vehicle use to the west, which is, of course, further away from the intersection than the applicant's driveway.
Correct.
If hypothetically they could do an access easement from that driveway to the west, would that be sufficient distance?
potentially 100-foot was what we were looking for based on the design manual.
They don't have that. Page 79 feet, sometimes still not cut up. Is the southeastbound service road on CF1, is that way one way southeastbound?
Correct.
So if they were to put a second driveway on the service road, they would limit their exiting traffic to going southeast to the next turnaround.
Yes. And not only that, those entrances are all subject to approval by TxDOT.
I think that's all my questions.
Commissioner Treadwell.
So, following up on Commissioner Wheeler's question, there was previously a gas station here. Was it the same configuration?
There was a canopy. My understanding is there was a canopy generally located kind of in the middle of the site. I don't know where the building was. I can assume it was in the southwestern portion, but that would have been built either on significantly older city code or prior to city code.
Okay, that was my question. Like, how do they not have the same issue with the driveway on Elam?
Any new development should meet the current standards of the code. Likely it was older than either prior to annexation or prior to zoning and current road standards.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Any other questions, commissioners?
Okay, let the record reflect that on case number 13, Commissioner Young does have to talk about this one. And he's stepping out of the room.
We'll stay with Ms. Williams.
Please let me know when you can see my screen.
We can.
Wonderful. Z223114. This has two elements to the request. One is for a new PD, and this PD has either an MU3 base and then additional project standards for a special project. And then the second element of the request is for a D1 liquor control overlay. The property is currently zoned. It has split zoning. So we have a GR, general retail subdistrict, within PD 193 and PD number 9, which has a base of NS, or neighborhood service uses. That portion, the NS section in PD 9, does have a D overlay, which is why they're requesting to go to a D1. The property is located on the east corner of Cedar Springs Road and Fairmont Street, and there's additional frontage on Howell, and I'll show you that in just a moment. It's just about 4 acres, and of course located in Uptown. And then here is the property and zoning. It's kind of actually difficult to see the zoning on this map, so I apologize for that. But majority is zoned PD 193 in the vicinity. There are several PDSs with a variety of sub-district bases, mostly in the GR sub-district base, with a few in the LC. And then the property that's red is the remainder of PD 9. And the property right now in its current condition contains office, bar, restaurant, and surface parking uses, which you'll see more clearly in the aerial map in just a moment. And then surrounding land uses include a variety of office, bar, multiple family and financial institutions to the north, both on the east and west side, and then additional retail and personal service uses, and a few unique uses, including childcare facility and the sale of alcohol in conjunction with an establishment of a religious, charitable, or philanthropic nature, which is actually found in PD number 9, which is why it's defined so strictly, because it was defined by that PD. And then to the southwest, additional bank and savings loan office with drive-in window and office uses. So here is the aerial map. As I noted, you can see here that the site is largely paved. Not very much green area, lots of surface parking throughout. And the frontages has 4 street frontages along Cedar Springs Road, Ruth, Howell, and Fairmont. Now we will conduct the site visit. This is, I'm not sure why I started here on Howell. I apologize for that. But let's go ahead and enter the interior of the site, all the surface parking, existing office structures within the property. And then as we travel northwest on Ruth, you see the other office uses, philanthropic use that sells alcohol, and then other surrounding uses here. This is to the north at Cedar Springs and Ruth. And then as we travel westward, we're going to go counterclockwise for once. I apologize for that, but I had already set it up, so I went with it. Now we're traveling southwest along Cedar Springs Road. You see the developed nature, the sidewalks in the area, the height of the surrounding office structures and mix of uses. And traveling southeast on Fairmont. Some really good screening magnolias all along this section, turning onto Howell. And then additional office uses for the quadrangle. And then residential use at the northeast side of Ruth, adjacent to Cedar Springs, where we have another bank use. Now, this chart is probably easier to read in the case report, and it shows it all in one chart instead of broken in 2. The way that I've broken it apart here is showing the existing and proposed comparison district, and then the special project and comparison to the MIH category base under the MU3 district standards. And this way you have a clearer vision of what is proposed. Since the site could have either a base development type with the MU3 standards or a special project as delineated specifically in the PD conditions. So for that reason, we have then, of course, the dual zoning. So you're looking at 2 existing zoning districts, which are completely different in nature. If you look at the setbacks, the height, the FAR, and the lot coverage, they are completely different. And then the land uses as well. Obviously, PD9 was built in a time where they envisioned this area as being more neighborhood scale, not quite as urban. And then now what's been developed in the vicinity and what we've seen with the Oaklawn PD is that we have a lot denser, more urban. This is a core neighborhood for the urban center of the city of Dallas. And so for that reason, the GR subdistrict in both Chapter 51 as well as in PD 193 lends to slightly lessened setbacks, and then of course additional FAR, height, and lot coverage with the addition of different uses to make or form a more complete neighborhood. We have, you know, neighborhood serving institutions and resources as well as employment opportunities, along with the McKinney Rail, which is about a mile away from this subject site and lends for a good opportunity for transit. So the proposed PD with an MU3 base does venture a little from those standards in the GR subdistrict by technically reducing some of the setbacks, but then it does have a difference in how they're set back at greater heights. And that's specifically important because the MU3 district does allow a greater intensity of height. And then the lot coverage matches and the mix of uses is pretty similar to the GR subdistrict as well. So what we're seeing is greater height and a change in how the setbacks are represented in the neighborhood. Then for the proposed PD for MU3 with a special project, they've gone a little further. What they've done is they've matched the setbacks more to the neighborhood as they currently exist, which doesn't necessarily align with the vision for the neighborhood, which says to reduce setbacks. However, they have taken 2 of those street frontages and reduced them from 25 feet per the existing plan for the PD9 frontage down to 20 feet. So there is some reduction, along with the greater height of the structure, bringing more urban form up to that street frontage and into the pedestrian realm. And then additionally, they've allowed for a much greater FAR if they do have the special project standards met, which include increased open space and design standards and mixed income housing being provided. They could go all the way up to 8 FAR and have different heights permitted in the 3 towers as proposed. Those 3 towers go from 330 feet all the way up to 415 feet. And that's, of course, a significant increase from the base MU3 standard of 270, and then the existing GR subdistrict of 120, or the existing PD9 that goes all the way back down to 36 feet. Now, in order to utilize that additional height, they did have to qualify that the story restriction had to be removed, because otherwise they would be limited to the base of 20 stories per the MU3 base district. So they have removed that for the special project standards. And then a comparison is to the MIH category E incentives offered. And while there are no height incentives, we do see an increase in lot coverage and increase in FAR, which is quite similar. If you look at it in comparison, it can go all the way up to 3 additional FAR points with 1 extra for a TOD, or transit-oriented development. Now, this site isn't necessarily considered a TOD, but they are within 1 mile and they are in an urban center in Uptown, a very walkable neighborhood. So by capitalizing on those elements, they have requested up to a 4-point FAR increase while providing mixed income housing either on site or through fee in lieu. Now, here is the proposed development plan. It identifies these 3 towers as proposed. Building number 1 is the one to the south, currently located in PD9, and that has the lowest height of 330 feet. Now, the one to the northeast, it has the height of 385, and then to the northwest is 415. Furthermore, this is the proposed landscape plan, which is only required for a special project. As you see, they have proposed a development plan and landscape plan in association with this request today, which gives the impression that they do plan to utilize the special project standards and provide the mixed income housing as proposed in the PD conditions. This landscape plan shows a site that is compliant basically with Article 10 while utilizing some of the urban street standards that are found in Article 10. And so, again, the landscape plan is only required for a special project, and they've submitted one to us today, and Article 10 is required otherwise. This plan was reviewed by our city arborist and found to be acceptable, and a building heights plan was also provided to better describe the setbacks that are provided for these taller structures, and this is supposed to help us understand it better. And I'm hoping that what I provided in the case report was clear enough that in combined with this plan, you were able to get a good sense of those additional setbacks provided in the property. I won't lie, it was very confusing, and Luke did a fantastic job of talking me through it so I could thoroughly understand this. And I want to thank Luke Franz and their team for working diligently on this project. Overall, I'd like to discuss the deviations and enhancements that are offered through this PD. So ultimately, they are adjusting setbacks where they have slightly reduced in some cases, but accommodates the greater step back overall for those taller heights of structures as proposed. And then specifically for a special project, they increase the height all the way up to 415 feet, the FAR up to 8.0. And then, of course, the base district has those increases built in as well. So they're still getting something either way. These are both upzoning requests. And then no stories to utilize that additional height if they do have a special project as proposed. 2 development type requests, again, I'm splitting those up because there are some differences between the two. And when we compare those two, there are enhancements for the MU3 base, which, I'm sorry, that's an error there. Let's move over to this slide instead. This one splits up the enhancements overall for the PD. So just with the MU3 base, which is an increase of 150 feet in height, an additional FAR. So just from that increase right there, they're providing standards including structured parking with active uses wrapping at a depth of 25 feet, internal loading docks and service entries, a minimum 10-foot unobstructed sidewalks, 6 to 8 foot pedestrian pathways connecting to the streets since we have 4 street frontages going through the site, a variety of pedestrian amenities, enclosed bike parking, 3 public art installations. And I want to clarify that varied power lines are not going to be required as a standard, even though it was initially requested by the applicant. That is something that we are unable to write into our PDs. So you can expect to not see that any longer, even if it is a negotiated term of the applicant who is willing to provide that. It's not something that we can enforce at the end of the day. And so we do not recommend inclusion in our PD conditions. Therefore, it has been removed from the PD conditions. However, I failed to remove it from my case report, so I do apologize for that. Additionally, they have architectural elements being provided, including breaking up frontages and providing 30% transparency for the lower levels. And then finally, they have prohibited surface parking. For a special project, we also get completely underground parking and underground loading required for interior to the parking, which is all underground. There have been parking deviations requested, so amended parking ratios, which combine several uses. And these have all been assessed in a parking study that was considered by our engineering division and found suitable. Staff also recommended to add the mixed income housing multifamily parking ratio to permit a minimum of 1/2 space per dwelling unit with 15% of parking available for guest parking. This is the code standard. And since we refer back to our code standards, we're going to go ahead and request that they insert that into this PD. They have agreed to that ratio as an option. That does not mean that they will be required to provide that. It means that they can go that low. Overall, we did perform consistency review and look at the area plan. This is within the Downtown Dallas 360 plan, which was adopted and then updated in 2017. And the plan's key recommendation for this area is to create a transit-oriented walkable neighborhood by developing new projects and redeveloping existing neighborhoods with small setbacks, ground floors with high transparency, and retail or restaurant uses, and to address parking needs while envisioning no surface parking in front of buildings. And they have hit all of those items. And so since we have found it to be consistent with the policy or goals recommended in the 360 plan, the proposal goes as far as to contribute to that walkable, vibrant urban neighborhood as described in the plan. And so we do believe that it is supportive of the plan goals. Now, if you review the conditions and the recommendation, it is based on staff's recommended conditions. And that's because we do have 2 boxes in those conditions. Those boxes are related to how we recommend the mixed income housing be applied to the site. Now, I discussed why staff recommendation is to support the increased FAR and height, and I compared that in the development standards table to a mixed income project in category E, which is this site in an MU3 base with an increase of up to 4 FAR. Of course, there's no height increase, but at minimum, staff would require by base code that there be 10% of mixed income housing provided to those in the 61 to 80 AMFI category and 5% at the 81 to 100 AMFI category. The applicant's request is to only provide 5% at 81 to 100 AMFI, cutting out that 10% for the portion at 61 to 80. And staff does not support this element of the request. Although this is a magnificent project, we do believe that it's, number one, appropriate just considering the base code requirements. Number two, appropriate for the fact that they're getting even more than the base requirements as requested. And number three, a high priority need for the city of Dallas, especially in our urban neighborhoods. Finally, in this specific box, there's also a provision to have fee in lieu. Basically, it's the exact thing that our code says. And so for that reason, we don't recommend having it there, because anything that's exactly the same as code does not need to be written into a PD. Writing it into a PD lends to the idea that there's a deviation from the standard. And that's not the case at this time. What they've requested is exactly what we have. Therefore, there's no reason to write it there, and it's redundant. So we just recommend removing that section. That doesn't mean that fee in lieu wouldn't apply. And then there's, I think the trepidation comes from more of how that standard is applied, which if we have a moment, we'd like to discuss further. But the only other box I'd like to mention is relating to hours of operation for a retail and personal service use, which limits them to the hours of 6 a.m. to midnight. Now, this provision is an operational request. It's not, this request is not an SUP. So this is the wrong place for this sort of provision and leads to a failure in overall enforcement. That's not something that the city wants to have, and that's not something that we typically permit in a PD. So this operational standard should not be written into the conditions because it's not something that will be easily enforced. Now, at this point, would we like to take a moment to discuss the fee in lieu, or should I finish my presentation? It's just a few more slides.
Please go ahead and finish.
Okay, so as I mentioned, staff did consider the overall comparison of public benefits being provided and the surrounding rezoning cases and bonuses offered, not only through base zoning through MIH, but also through all the PDSs in the vicinity that have requested additional height, FAR, and a variety of land uses, but mostly in line with the GR subdistrict or LC subdistricts. So this request has added even greater design standards, open space, sustainability standards, and mixed income housing. The increase in FAR allows for greater massing of towers at taller heights, all adding to that urban nature. And while they didn't exactly hit the setbacks item, they did try to include some of those reductions. And then, of course, the massing of those structures hits that item on the head as well. So we are satisfied with it and do believe that overall it will fit into the character of the neighborhood and work for this site. So with that, staff recommendation is approval of the plan development district subject to a development plan, setback plan, and landscape plan, and then staff's recommended conditions and approval of a D1 liquor control overlay.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munoz. Excellent briefing. Questions, Commissioner? Commissioner Trevor.
What is a special project? Why is it used?
That's, you beat us to the question. That's an excellent question, Ms. Munoz. Please.
So a special project is the request of the applicant to define when certain additional provisions are met, certain development standards are provided for. In this case specifically, you can go to our PD conditions. Let me pull it up so that I can read it since I didn't put it in the actual case report or in the presentation. I have it right here and I can read it to you in just 1 second. It is special project means a project with an FAR greater that is compliant with sections 112, 113, 114, and 116. And then if we refer back to those sections, it'll tell you that they would have to comply with, I believe it's the design standards, sustainability, open space, let's see, and the mixed income housing.
But once they meet them, what's the benefit?
Excuse me?
I said, once they meet them, what's the benefit? Like, why, what does this designation get you?
It gets you as outlined in the plan of development.
I'm with you.
Not just FAR, it's also additional height. So as written throughout the PD conditions, it's primarily the height and the FAR, which is what I was going over in my description of the comparison of the two different types of development that they can have. Either a base MU3 PD development type up to 270 feet, 4.5 FAR, with a variety of those design standards already applicable. Or basically we get mixed income housing and then they get an additional 4 or 3.5 points of FAR, and they get to go up from 270 all the way up to 415 feet in height.
So is it like a bespoke version of the mixed income housing development bonus?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
So if I'm thinking about this correctly, so the mixed income housing development bonus, you hit certain requirements, you get additional density. Is the special project concept sort of the same idea, but you're crafting your own elements each time?
I would take a stab at it and I would say how I understand it. Sorry, Jen.
Well,
and then you can
it's almost like a PD within a PD. Exactly. But I'll let Andrea continue.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So usually, like, you do a very clean PD and you say, these are your standards, these are the bonuses, and then these are the standards include design standards as well. This thing with the special project, it looks like, oh, you still have the base PD for whatever, but then we create this little PD inside the PD. And now you have to comply with all of this, but you can still do all of that, which I think is just, it makes it a little bit more complicated to follow, because at the end of the day, that's what a PD does. So it looks like there are two layers of a PD on top of one another, but at the end of the day, we can simplify it and call it just what it is. It's what we do with any PD. These are your standards, this is the bonus, this is the development.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand why we have to overcomplicate it by calling it something new.
That's the request we received. It took us a little bit. We started to see more of this in the latest years. It took us a little bit to realize, okay, and I think we're gonna have to we already started discussions internally to regroup and simplify this thing, because if it's complicated for all of us, including us, they need to be simplified.
It is extremely complicated, and it's something that takes a sharp eye to go through, and it still leaves us open to the possibility for a great amount of errors. So we worked diligently with the applicant for that reason for several months going over these conditions, and landed on this final set, which I'm proud only includes 2 boxes, only because of the applicant's willingness to work with us on several of those items. However, some of these items, I think open space is probably one of the most confusing sections for this whole PD. If you do have questions about that, let me know. I definitely didn't touch on it in my presentation, but I'm happy to go over it at this point. And if not, I know that Suzanne and Luke will be happy to go over it during the hearing as well.
They're chomping at the bit, yes. I have one, go ahead. Go first. Well, I was just one quick follow-up. Commissioner Treadway used 2 interesting words. Why overcomplicate? But in terms of the special project designation, I'm hoping that you can provide us a little bit of context, maybe on broader terms, maybe not specific to this project or another one currently at permitting, and you could maybe talk about maybe some of the difficulties that staff is seeing.
I mean, as far as I can only speak to my experience with the review process, and in the review process, and Luke and Suzanne can speak to this as well. Unfortunately, it did complicate how we assess the site. It is like we are reviewing 2 requests at the same time. And if you know any case that includes an element of additional design standards, PD cases in general, additional benefits being provided to the public with a lot of development standard changes, those can be complicated to begin with. So when you're juggling two different ideas within one PD, at times they can be at odds. And I think that comes out in several of the sections, even though we tried to bring it down as much as possible, which causes delay in the case review and overall production of these items coming to CPC and council for ultimate decision making. I'm not saying that they're bad. They are wonderful. This is a wonderful project. But what I am saying is that it is complicated. It's very complicated, and it's something that needs to be reviewed with a high amount of diligence, which isn't always something that we have the time to do, although we try our best. So it really depends on the experience level of staffs, their time that they have to be able to review these items, and how much they're able to work with those representatives as well and work with the applicants. Now, when it comes to permitting, though, I can't speak to that, but I would imagine if a regular PD can cause issues, one with additional standards would as well.
Commissioner,
I don't want to put anyone on the spot here, but I see two people sitting nearby me who have significant experience working at Jefferson. Y'all don't need to.
Oh my gosh, you're better fixes.
But if y'all feel comfortable speaking to this, with your experience in the zoning on the permitting side, what are your thoughts on the impact of special projects on zoning as it relates to permitting?
You were talking about QT? No. Well, a lot of my experience was really in like the regular plan review. So the people that weren't expediting and, you know, hiring attorneys, hiring, you know, lots of architects and engineers and stuff. Like a lot of my like plan review experience when I was doing that was more so your mom and pop shops and stuff like that. So they definitely could not hang with a special project kind of brain exercises. But Jennifer worked in Q team, and that's where all like the fancy ones went. I just had to like chime in on the weird questions usually.
I just think that if it's not, or I shouldn't even, it's not, in my experience, if it's not so carefully written, it ends up in a weird back and forth about what does the word "the" mean, and it becomes it's an interpretation game, and it bogs things down. Yes.
How does that differ from just because the alternative to special project is just to write a freestanding PD for that particular project, no flexibility, no nothing. So I mean, how is it different? Are we still going to be bogged down?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just PDs in general.
Any flexibility, any deviation from code causes.
Well, and Jen said something about, you know, if it's a standard from base code, we typically don't put it into the PD, but it's weird because for the most part, that's true. But then in other instances, if you don't put it in there, it sometimes doesn't apply unless you put it in there. So it's a very, you have to be so careful you're rewriting an entire development code every time you're doing a PD, because even if it refers to base, any exceptions or, I mean, things like RPS, for example, it's if it's in the PD, then it means this. If you don't specifically say anything, then it means something different. It's an interpretation game, and PDs in general, I don't think there's anything particularly egregious about a special project versus just a standard PD. It's a good point.
Any other questions on the Commissioner, please?
Just to follow up, shifting gears to the fee in lieu language, Ms. Munoz. You said earlier that it was redundant with the provisions of 20A. Is that right?
That's correct.
Can you think of any reason why, I don't have, probably have the same question for the applicant, but any reason why that provision should be included, or any effect that that provision might have that's distinct from 20A?
I think that the applicant's intent is to ensure that today's applicability will continue to apply. And I don't think that that is what they are getting by including the base standard code provision, because interpretations will always change. They can change. I'm not saying it'll change from one day to the next. I'm saying policy changes, and so interpretations can change with time. And if the intent is to keep it as it's currently being interpreted, that's not going to meet their need.
Interpretive changes. Whose interpretation are you referring to?
This would be how this section of 20A applies when they're doing, I believe, permit review. So how housing applies, where fee in lieu is required to be paid for certain structures or mix of uses is what we're specifically talking to. But I believe Michael Pepe could speak more to this, as he's had some recent experiences in working through these issues with both our housing and permitting sections.
Certainly. So your last question was, why would they include that given that it's a standard of code? I can't necessarily speak to that, but I do know that when we have special projects, I am of the understanding that maybe one utility that the body sees for them is that it bundles expectations, it bundles rights, things from setback, lot coverage, FAR. It bundles them, and you get a neat project that's tied to a bonus, because everything involved in the lot or the PD or the PDS is all one property, and we're only we're only a year and a quarter out from the approval of, or the last amendment to the mixed income housing ordinance. We're seeing some of those projects come through. And as she said, it's correct. They're submitted for permit, and similarly to how like a permit is reviewed, does it meet fire specifications? One of the boxes they check when we write in mixed income bonuses, one of the boxes they need to check is housing review. They submit a mixed income housing development bonus application with information about the projects to housing, and then they have to go through steps and those are described in Chapter 20A, to fulfill that, and then only then do they get moved forward. Just as a caution, sometimes when we bundle things under special projects, because there's an option for base zoning, if you can meet certain provisions of the base zoning, there are circumstances where it's being interpreted and applied at that phase as, here's our special project, it's got certain components of the project, here's the base, a part of the project using base zoning, when I don't know and I don't believe that you guys reviewed it that way or staff reviewed it that way. I think your good faith reading of the PDs might have been that the rights were all bundled, when in reality, sometimes when it's getting applied, they might be splitting it off into, well, this is special project, this is not special project, and then just hitting under targets for development standards potentially in some circumstances. And I don't know if that's an eccentricity, but my understanding by a lot of people is that the special project might be to give certainty or predictability when you guys stamp a project, that all this is together, when it may not in fact be that way in application. How that relates to the fee and lieu being written into the PD, I don't necessarily see how it relates to being tied in, but it is something that I wanted to bring up because it ties to the special project and expectations. I don't have a solution for it today. We've been working with the housing department in understanding how these projects are moving through the pipeline, because you know how long it takes, but a year out from the program, we are starting to see that yield. And I just want to temper expectations as to what's occurring after language is submitted and approved.
I follow up, of course. questions. So for example, I just want to understand what you're saying. So let's take a hypothetical where there's a special project and there are 4 high-rise buildings proposed within it, right? Is that?
That's the most common form of multi-use 9-figure development right now.
Gotcha. And what a developer might do is take building 1, only build it to base and not to special project standards, right?
Potentially, yes.
And if they only build it to base, the current interpretation that city staff, whether it's on housing or whether it's in permitting, is providing is that building only built to base doesn't need to pay the fee in lieu for that square footage, right?
In some circumstances, yes. Okay. And yeah, exactly. As you know, it's calculated by square footage. It's divorced. The fee in lieu calculation is divorced from the 15%, 5%, 10% that we approve here. It's based on a different process. However, the special project language, the trigger for mixed income housing is important. So casting a broad net for those sorts of things would at the very least give you the predictability of product that maybe you're looking for.
Okay. Let me might go to legal for a few more questions. I'm not going on too long. So, Mr. Moore, you reviewed this fee in lieu language,
yes,
right? And we just heard Ms. Munoz say that she understands the intent of this language to be sort of to freeze city staff's interpretation of ordinance language, right? Can city code freeze an interpretation of language without actually changing city code itself to clarify what it means?
It cannot, Mr. Rubin. So this would be in a PD, and Article 1 of Chapter 51A gives the building official the ability to interpret Chapter 51 and all of the PDs that come along with it. And the building official's interpretation, the building official can make an official interpretation, and that official interpretation can change over time. So that language, you can't really freeze it in because the building official could change the interpretation at a later date.
And we're about a year into the current iteration of mixed income housing, including the fee in lieu, right?
The building official's interpretation would only apply to Chapter 51A and all the associated PDs, but the mixed income housing portion is in Chapter 28A.
Okay.
So that would be the separation.
Housing director.
And if 28 were to change at some point in the future, that would have to go through council, right?
Correct.
And I assume at that point, council could decide whether to make those changes retroactive or only for projects that are going forward.
They could, council's change of Chapter 20A could be based on projects that I guess through in the permitting process, but they wouldn't be able to go completely retroactive. Is what I would say.
If something's built out and permitted before council makes the change, then that is what it is. But let's just say something is zoned in a particular way, but isn't actually built out before council makes a change. Council could decide whether to apply to what's already been zoned that hasn't been built out, or just say it only applies to things that have zoning changes relating to MIH on a going forward basis.
Yes, assuming that they don't have those permits, because then you would start getting into the vested rights issues.
Okay. Gotcha. Well, thank you for going down that path with me.
Thank you. I'm sure.
Maybe I'm gonna ask, and I don't know if it's so clarification. So this is to help Jefferson when it gets there in a way so that they won't have to have that interpretation, because oftentimes Jefferson is trying to figure out why or what to do. But this helps them kind of have clarity. Because sometimes it's the definition needs a little expanding, but it's very thankful. We have, everyone knows I'm in the worst in the world. And the interpretation that city staff is always confused. Per se, takeout only restaurants are considered food and beverages. Right? But if the definition is a set just for takeout restaurants, so this is to help Jefferson not have to have so much stress over it.
I would interject and say that the biggest help we can do for the transparency of the whole process and not have any landmines that you unwillingly plan is to basically base on the code as much as possible, because once you know that that's the rule and the rule applies, you use a PD for deviations when they are warranted. So I would not try, that's what we're trying to say, like, let's not reinvent the wheel with every PD. Sometimes the PDs are warranted, sometimes the base code can work as well. So I see it more like it's deviation. I cannot do the code here because of this, like it's impossible. And therefore, it becomes a little bit of a negotiation where we start to add, okay, in addition to the code, now we're adding design standards and what we would like, because again, we also acknowledge that the code is from 87 and it has absolutely no traction on the reality right now. So PDs are a great tool. I would say this. We have to be very careful how we use the tools all the time.
Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Munoz. Let's go ahead and take our lunch break. Back online in 12:20. It is 11:56.